of merchants and saying that a championing of of free trade, and he claimed that Parliament, the English Parliament, he was from Scotland, but they'd already formed the United Kingdom. The Parliament was in the pocket of the merchants, and that free trade, and the merchants would then put in protective tariffs, and so free trade would make it cheaper for everybody. And that was considered a fairly radical position. And when he died in 1791, and the French Revolution was just getting underway. And he was blamed in one obituary for having stirred the flames that led to such atrocities, and the atrocities hadn't happened yet. It wasn't the Reign of Terror yet. Such atrocities as the French Revolution. So he was a radical back then, says 1791. By 1881, 190 years later, people at Ronald Reagan's inauguration wore this tie, or not exactly this one, but one identical to it, as a badge of how they were conservatives against, the liberal policies of Jimmy Carter or Democratic administrations past. I wear it to explain that there are two sides to Adam Smith. The famous book called The Wealth of Nations, has a longer title than that, but what we know is The Wealth of Nations on the one hand, and on the other hand, a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which talks about how we all have a connection to each other through the human sentiment of sympathy. And so that Adam Smith is actually talking about both aspects of human nature, and I will not bother you with my long takedown of economics as it's currently taught, I hope not by Michael, which only looks at the self-interested side of the Wealth of Nations side, as opposed to the sympathy we have for each other, love, cooperation, and so forth. Anyway, there you go. That's why I'm wearing the tie. Hello, everybody.
Thank you. We all want to thank you for being here with us, Paul. This crazy time for all of us, and then just weird for education, right? To be able to connect with the students and everything. So, we know you're super busy and you got a lot going on, and we appreciate you taking some time to be with us and
sure.
And share some knowledge with us. So we're all really excited to be here. So.
Look, at this stage of my life, I'm 75 years old. I've been doing the PBS NewsHour since 1985. I've taught a whole bunch of places, from kindergarten through for community college, all the way to fancy ass schools. And and all I want to be is useful to people. So I put a tweet out there a few weeks ago saying, hey, come have me visit your class, and as long as I can fit it into my schedule, I'll do it. And I can, and so here I am. And super pleased to be here.
Sweet, thank you. We appreciate it. So my students, just kind of let them know, like, hey, the format would be just that they have questions for you, and then we can kind of expand on those questions, and then hear what you have to say or what you have to offer. They've heard me a lot, right? So I mean, they have me in class. So and so it'd be great to get some insight from you. Great.
Well, look, what I like to do is answer questions, and if people don't ask questions, I call on them. I cold call them. But what I'd like is Ethan, Timothy, Annika, Nadia, Fernando, Michael, Danny, and Oscar, would you please, if you can, if I know sometimes you don't have the broadband width and stuff, but if you can, put on your cameras just so I can see you, since otherwise it's a little asymmetrical. You guys can see me, I can't see you. So as many of you as can get up on there. There we go. There's Isabel. Ethan. Annika's got this really cute panda, but still, I assume she doesn't really look like that. Great, Fernando. Thanks. Annika, there you are. Oh, you don't look anything like a panda. Not even. There's no family resemblance whatsoever. And got most people here, so still Nadia, Timothy, and Danny. But if you guys come on, great. If you don't, it's no big deal. It doesn't mean I won't call on you. I guarantee you that, because your names are prominent in the middle of the frame. as opposed to everybody else's. So ask me questions. And if you don't, like I say, I'll ask you to ask me questions and I'll call on you. Yeah, so just raise a hand. Question, there you go. Okay, great. Jonah.
Jonah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask if there will be a future projection of job growth for economics, especially after a time like this.
Yeah, I'm in the midst of doing a story. It will run tomorrow night at I don't know what time it runs in El Paso, but I assume it's 6:00. It's pretty much where it runs around. The PBS NewsHour runs everywhere in the country and some other countries too. And the story is about what is likely to happen to the job market, the labor market, what the implications of that are for inequality, economic inequality, and third, whether or not we will have any public policy to deal with those implications. So one, and I did 9 interviews yesterday, doing the same exact way I'm talking to you. I mean, the same shot. And of all the workers I talked to, service workers in the bottom half of the economy, that is in terms of compensation, to a person, there were economists in there, so they weren't all workers, but 6 of them, I think, were workers, and every one of them said that they thought there were going to be fewer jobs coming out of this for bartenders. There was an events planner, there was a restaurant worker, there was a travel agent, there were 3 janitors. They were less insistent on there being less jobs, but all the rest of them thought there will be fewer jobs and all of them will be applying for those jobs, competing for those jobs. And what that will do, as we know from the basic law of supply and demand, greater supply of workers, lower demand for the workers. Which way do their wages go? Yeah, right, exactly. Right, Ryan. They'll go down. And so, I mean, we're seeing it right now with regard to oil, right? I mean, there's too much oil. Nobody wants the oil. You can't just stop pumping the oil any more than you can just say, okay, let's kill off the people who would normally be in the labor market. And so the supply goes up or stays the same. The demand goes down drastically, and you get prices, to the point now, as you've probably read, that there are oil producers who are paying people to take the oil off their hands because they have nowhere to put it. Right.
Well, just real quick, I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Because I tend to maybe disagree with that statement, or I just don't know how long that's going to last. Because it's not like the infrastructure is gone, right? Like it's not like restaurants are like. It's not like poor, It's not like these.
Let's argue. Let's argue. Here's what they say.
Mm-hmm.
So the travel agent says, there's not only is there going to be a long time, is it going to be a long time before people fly anywhere near as much as they used to.
Yeah.
But now that they're used to, I'm just telling you what they said, although I believe them. But now that we do communication like this, why would you go to an academic conference in, I don't know, Singapore? I mean, you might want to see what Singapore looks like, but why would you go back a second time? I've been to Singapore once, that's it. Why would you go back a second time when you can, for no cost to your company and way less wear and tear on yourself, you can do what we're doing now?
Right.
My job, I give you an example. I'm not in the bottom half of the service industry, right? But I'm in the top half. But my job is now so much easier than it was, so much cheaper to do. It's somewhat less effective. I'm not taking a field trip. It's somewhat less gratifying. I'm not actually mixing it up with people, face to face. But it's a question of economics. The savings are enormous. And that's going to be true of lots of business conferences, lots of academic conferences. And so that's travel. Okay. Then think of restaurants. One thing a bartender said to me yesterday, I hadn't thought of this. He said, people are now getting used to cooking at home for the first time.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people I've had tell me, man, this is fun. I feel really accomplished. Now, maybe that won't last forever. I'm sure there are diminishing returns to the thrill of cooking for yourself, to use an economics concept. But it'll have some impact, presumably. And people will have less disposable income, so they won't be eating out as much. And a lot of restaurants will have closed down and not opened up, and there won't be jobs for those people. Long run, if you mean, Michael, 10 years from now, maybe. I don't know that this is a total sea change. On the other hand, 10 years from now, many of those people might need to be doing different jobs. There's going to be lots of home delivery. There are more jobs. I mean, Instacart, those guys are hiring lots of people now, but those are low-wage jobs, right?
Yeah.
And those people are competing with each other. So I don't think there's a good argument that the labor market will bounce back. And what that means in terms of economic inequality is more people at the bottom driving their wages down. And that, of course, even as the people at the top lose assets, lose wealth because the stock market goes down, I think these guys are going down more than those guys. That would be my guess. Then the question is, will public policy be more redistributive? And there it's an open question, but most of the economists I talked to said they didn't think we were going to adopt a Bernie Sanders strategy, at least in part because we've spent so much money now. The other side of the story is, hey, we now realize we're all in it together, and we've set a precedent of not universal basic income, but certainly we send a check to everybody, and it's progressive, right? Because it's only for people who earn $75,000 a year or less. And so we have done something redistributive here, and maybe we'll get more used to it and be more willing to do it. So those are the two sides, and nobody can know what the answer is to what's actually going to happen. Anyway, that's what I think is happening to the labor market now and for the foreseeable future. Next question. Let's see, who's going to ask me a question? Luisa, ask me a question.
I saw that the stimulus package included a provision for small businesses, but then big corporations like Shake Shack and Ruth Chris Steakhouse ended up getting a lot of money, even though they're not really small businesses. So in your opinion, I guess what's a way that they could correct that?
Well, I'm not sure. I just took a walk before I came here to get a little exercise, and the guy I walk with asked me the same question. And I'm thinking, Shake Shack hires a lot of people. I'm not sure how resentful I am that Shake Shack is being helped to stay in business. There's a huge constituency. Small business has a lot of lobbying power, but I'd have to look more into the details. At any rate, my first reaction is not, oh my God, they're giving it to big businesses, because a lot of those loans, that money, a lot of it is loans, and the loans are contingent on you, the employer, keeping your work. 75% of the money is supposed to go to keeping your employees employed. So that's a form, that's forcing the companies to keep people, to furlough them as opposed to lay them off, for example. And I think that's a good thing. And so I'm not horrified that it's big companies or that that's something we need to worry about. So something as I was walking in here about Harvard getting money. I don't know under what circumstances Harvard was getting money. That I would think ought to be fixed. I've been very close to Harvard. It's nearby. I'm here in Boston. I've taught there, and but Harvard doesn't need the money. so that I would look for a fix. Let's see. Fernando, ask me a question. Oh, you're chewing. Okay.
He's always eating.
Hey, stop chewing and ask me a question, or do both. Oh, wait. No, Fernando's on, then Ryan, then Joni. Joni, he asked a question. So yeah, Fernando.
Mr. Jager's a great teacher, but I haven't gotten a chance to ask him the question yet. I was kind of just wondering, like, this is going to lead to like a recession, right? And
Oh yeah. Oh no, we're already in a recession. Is technically defined, and really the technical definition doesn't matter much. But just so you know, a recession is when 2 quarters of the year in succession are lower than the GDP before. Remember, the GDP is, final goods and sales, sales in dollar terms of all goods and services in the economy, right? Remember, that's GDP. And remember what it equals. It equals C, consumption, what we all spend, plus I, remember, which is investment, which is what businesses spend, plus G, what government spends, plus exports minus imports, but that's a small part of it. And right now, of course, what's happened? There's no C, right? There's no I. Who the hell would invest in this environment? It's all G, right? And G isn't going to be spending as much as C and I are not spending. Therefore, the GDP will be lower. And when it goes down 2 3-month periods in a row, 2 quarters of the year, for half a year, that's technically a recession, a receding. I would use my hairline, receding hairline, but it's long since recessed past the point of being able to use that word. A depression is when it goes so deep, and there's no formal definition of it. It's so deep that it takes years to get out of. We are certainly in a recession at the moment, and there's no chance, because the first quarter of the year results are, I think we're down, I can't remember, we're down 10%, I think, in the first quarter. And so that would be an annual rate of 40%, almost half, right? 10% per quarter. And and remember, the first quarter included January, where we weren't really closing down anything. So we could be, by the end of the second quarter, we could be in something that, it's a figurative term, a depression, but we could be something that people would start calling a depression. But a recession, for absolute certain, that's what we are absolutely in that now. Yeah. Ryan, Ryan, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the silver lining in all this is really because exactly what we're learning is applying to what we're seeing in the news and the articles. Like we just finished talking about aggregate demand and supply. And one of the articles I was reading is about that people are asking, what do I do with the stimulus money that I'm getting? And someone was writing that because of the multiplier effect that we have, that we really should be spending that, go out, support local businesses, pay your utilities, everything like that. Would you agree with that sentiment to get the economy back up?
There is a danger that what people will do is save even more than they typically did. Certainly it is a strong suspicion. I don't think the numbers are in yet, but I don't actually know, that the household savings rate will go up. And there's the most famous economist of the first half of the 20th century in the West. Remember, in Asia, there are more people and more economists, and I just don't know. I don't read their languages, and I'm just not familiar with what they said. But in the West, the most famous economist of the first half of the 20th century was a guy named John Maynard Keynes, Keynes. And John Maynard Keynes wrote about what he called, it wasn't a new idea with him, but he wrote about what he called the paradox of thriftiness, saving, right? Because he said when everybody saves at the same time, that drives the economy down, because Ryan, then you're not spending on Luisa's, I don't want to stereotype, I don't want to sexual stereotype, her sports team, and Luisa has to lay off Isabel, and then Isabel, can't go to Fernando's fancy restaurant, and so forth. And so and that's the danger, that it spiral down, right? And so Payne said, no, you that's the money. The government has to spend money precisely to counteract to keep the economy going, because there's no consumption and there's no investment. But also, if people start saving, the government wants to spend. And so yes, we want to spend, but the paradox is that it's a good thing for an individual to save, but if everybody saves, you get what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That's why you get the effect I'm talking about. And that's the paradox. Good for one, bad if everybody does it. So yes, that's a danger. I would not call it a silver lining. It would be, it's the dark side of the silver lining or something like that.
No, I was just talking about that. It's really cool what we're learning about like right now. In fact, I just turned in an assignment for Mr. Jager dealing about this, where he made the worksheet about exactly what's happening, and we had to draw out the graphs. And that's really the silver lining that we have.
Okay, that you can, look, this is the greatest teachable moment in my entire life. I mean, that's why I'm doing these classes, because, what normally you can imagine, Mr. Jager says, hey, we got some guy from, who's going to come to class, and you'll go, who cares? What, please leave me alone, But now it's like, wait a second, what the hell's going on here? So now I finally feel like I can be genuinely useful to people by explaining. So that is a silver lining for sure. Yes, let's see, who else we got here? Joshua, give me a question.
Okay, I had a question. So say magically at the end of June, virus is gone, everyone can go outside again. Is the economy still going to be going down because of like a momentum, or the second people start spending, things will just come back? Because people got laid off and stuff, right? So there's going to be less money flowing.
Yep, but that's the absolute best case scenario. That's the economy was up here, right, in terms of GDP. It went down to here within, in a few months. It came back up again to here in June, right, or July. It'll take a while to get there, right? This is time over here on this axis, right? It'll take a while to get back up, but it goes down, goes back up. It's a V-shaped recovery. What happened in 2008, the last time we had a real shock to the system, was what I did a story with a very smart and funny economist named Simon Johnson. And he said, what we have now, because this was years in already, was a bathtub-shaped recovery. It went down, it went like that, it stayed like that. And then it did eventually come back. But it was a long time on this timeline here before it came back, right? It wasn't even a U-shaped recovery. It was a possibility, and I think this is a distinct possibility. Again, I can't see the future any better than any of the rest of you, and nobody else can either. But a distinct possibility is you get a W-shaped recovery, and it's this kind of thing. Come down, sharp. June, everybody thinks everything's okay, sharp up to here. Fall comes, this is what happened in 1918 with the flu pandemic of 1918. There's what's called a recrudescence, basically. The virus comes back at the same time, by the way, as the seasonal flu does, right? And we go back down like that. And then, so it's not a W, I guess it's a da, da, and then the bathtub, right? And if I had to bet on any outcome, that's the outcome I'd bet on. Think of the fact, now we get into stuff that I don't really know much about, but I've done a lot of reading, and I know a lot of stuff because I've been paying attention for so many years. You think about, we get a flu shot every year, right? Those of us who get flu shots, and if you're my age, you get one religiously. We get a flu shot every year. Why? Because the flu mutates. And if it's little tiny bugs like viruses or bacteria, these are viruses, they're regenerating. There's a new generation of them every X minutes, whereas it takes human beings, 20, 30 years before we have a next generation where a mutation would show up. So they're mutating all the time, in our time frame. And there's now reports as of yesterday of various mutations of this particular virus in China. The information comes from China. So you could have a mutated virus at the same time as the flu epidemic, right? And you have complacency, as is happening now. I don't know if Georgia opening up now, or Sweden, which has been much more liberal in its policies with regard to people going back to public events and so forth, not to school, but I don't know if that's insane or not. I don't know if that's going to spark a recrudescence, a new epidemic, a new wave of the epidemic. But you would certainly, a prudent person, and I am kind of a chicken, I'm sort of a devout chicken, and I sure as hell wouldn't go out. I'm not going out. I mean, I take a walk with a friend. I'm wearing a mask, 2 masks actually, when I go out. And if somebody's coming in the other direction, I go and walk, into the woods and come back around. Now in Sweden, they may be doing that. I never thought you should be. I thought handshaking was a crazy idea. For years, I've thought that because I tend to get sort of bronchitis if I get a flu, a bad cold. So no more handshaking. That I think is a really safe bet. And so maybe you can do a whole bunch of things, washing your hands all the time, mask, no handshaking and stuff, that will make sure that the recrudescence happens very slowly. Okay. And that, the people are getting it little by little over a long period of time. But as contagious as this thing is, everywhere in the world, it's extremely hard for me to imagine that come June, the problem has actually gone away. And as you point out, and it's an astute point, Joshua, that with a lot of businesses already crippled, how do they just, come back like that? I don't think they're gonna have any trouble getting the workers back, but talk about buildings in New York. You have to keep maintenance on these old buildings in New York City. I did an interview with a couple of landlords a couple of weeks ago, and if you don't keep the building up, airplanes, I believe. Anyway, these are technicalities. Your point, I think, is well taken, and so I'm not optimistic at all about a V-shaped recovery, or not one that lasts very long. So back down again, whatever. Okay, let's see who we got here. Isabel asked me a question. Oh no, there's Jonah, but you've asked a question. I'm trying to get everybody in. So Isabel asked me a question.
I'm actually a fellow teacher here.
Oh, well, but ask me a question anyway. So
you mentioned businesses opening up, and I'm not in economics at all, but I'm worried about inflation.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people worry about. But it's not something that any serious economist is worried about right now.
Okay.
I have a prop. Allow me to. It occurs to me. I'm not prepared. wasn't prepared to use this prop, but I had an interview yesterday with an economist, a conservative, a Republican economist whom I've known for years. I always bring him on as as my Republican economist. And we were talking about this book.
Okay.
This is before they send me what are called bound galleys. Okay. So The Deficit Myth is by this woman, Stephanie Kelton. And this is from the left of the Democratic Party. And the argument that she and other people make goes under the heading Modern Monetary Theory, MMT. And what Stephanie Kelton says is, you never have to worry about a country not being able to spend enough to cover its deficits. Because, or this country anyway, the United States, because we can always print the money. And as long as all our resources are not being used, as long as there are people who are unemployed or underemployed, right? As long as there are factories that aren't going at full utilization, as they call it, as long as there's spare capacity, then the new money will spur the use of the people and the factories and the capacity, and there won't be inflation. Because the technical definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods and services. But if the new money coming in stimulates more production of goods and services, then the money matches the greater production, and there's no problem. Now, the other thing about money is, and whether or not there's inflation, is not just how much money there is, but how it's circulating. Because we go back to Ryan's question. Was it Ryan's question? Yeah, it was. If everybody simply saves the money and doesn't circulate it, then prices don't go up, right? Wages don't go up. If everybody's hoarding, back to the paradox of thrift. Right now, who's spending? The people I talk to say they're spending 50% of what they spent before. I'm here with you now, and if I had been invited to El Paso to talk, think of how much it would have cost me on the I would have had a speaker's fee, and I would have taken the airplane and the Uber back and forth and the hotel and all the rest of it. Nothing, zero. This costs nothing now, and that's the same when I'm doing my job. So it's not there's no goad to inflation here. In fact, the thing to worry about, I'm not saying you never worry about it, but the thing to worry about for the next few years is what's called deflation or disinflation. Prices going down. Not all prices, but look at oil. I mean, just for the most obvious and dramatic example. And what I'm talking about with regard to wages coming out of this, where wages will be lower for so many things. Look at the price of airline tickets now, or cruises. And disinflation's a real problem, because then you get this downward spiral of people spending less and saving more and not spending, and what I was talking about earlier. But right now, and so the Republican economist yesterday said to me, this is the Stephanie Kelton moment. This is the modern monetary theory moment. He said it's not going to last. He's worried that in the long run, you can't just keep borrowing, and we'll have to pay the piper at some point. I'm not sure that he's right, but even he says that at the moment, we don't have to worry about inflation. Yeah, let's see. Annika, you haven't asked a question yet. I know you're muted.
Yeah.
Or her microphone's not working.
Oh, is your mic not working? She is muted, but now
Yeah,
All right,
maybe
you
it's
can
your
write,
headphones. You have
right.
headphones in?
Do you have headphones in? No, she doesn't. She's not wearing
No.
headphones. So you write out a question. We'll go to somebody else. And there, from Isabel White to everyone. Type your question in, Annika. That's what Isabel suggests, right? Let's see. So anyway, Jonah, you've had your hand up a whole bunch. Oh no, there are two people. No, I don't see. Timothy, ask me a question. Unmute yourself and ask me a question. Are you there, Timothy? Or is it just your name is there? Maybe it's just his name.
He's been having technical difficulties. So.
Oh, is he? All right. Okay. So Nadia, can you ask a question?
I think Nadia is also having a
Oh,
little.
right. We had that. I asked her in the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So Jonah, go ahead.
Is there anything you would have done differently in the stimulus bill to keep the economy going at a faster rate, going up?
I don't. The stimulus bill is 1,200 pages long, and I haven't read one of those pages. Okay. By the way, I doubt that any member of Congress has either. Maybe they've read a few pages that their lobbyists put in front of them, but I don't know that there's a person on earth who's read all 1,200 pages. So I don't know the details well enough to know what to do. What I do know, what I do believe, at any rate, is that it is a remarkable spending thrust, and it's amazing that after 100 years of the Republican Party opposing this kind of massive spending, that the vote in the Senate was 96-0 with 4 people who weren't there because they were sick. Otherwise, it would have been unanimous, and a voice vote in the House. In 2008, 12 years ago, when this happened, the first time they passed, the president, the Republican president, and Congress put a bill before Congress with a stimulus that was, in real terms, that is inflation-adjusted terms, barely more than a third of this stimulus package. It was rejected by Congress because of Republican opposition. When in the 1930s, when this guy, we know who that guy is? Who's that guy? It says there, the man of the hour. Can you read it? Man of the hour. See, he's got a clock and he's at the helm of the economy there. He's steering the economy. What president of the United States is this?
We're really embarrassing Mr. Jager. He was a U.S. history teacher too.
1930s. Who was the president during the Great Depression?
Was it Eisenhower?
What?
Theodore Roosevelt?
No, but it's Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR. This guy comes in. The economy at that point had shrunk by about, the stock market had gone down by 86%. And the economy had shrunk by something like, I don't know, half or more. And it was over a period of 3.5 years. Took over from a Republican who didn't want to spend. He tried to spend and did a considerable amount of spending, but he won the election in 1932. He ran again in 1936. And when he ran in 1936, he ran on a balanced budget. Because Republicans, in part, because Republicans had given him such a hard time, said he was a communist. Because he's a guy who put in Social Security, federal bank insurance, and a whole bunch of programs like that. The welfare state as we know it, safety nets. But he got tremendous opposition from Republicans saying, you can't do deficit spending. There's going to be inflation. This is a period of tremendous disinflation, by the way. There's going to be inflation and there'll be hell to pay. we won't do it. You're in the pocket of the Soviet Union, because Russia had only recently become a communist country. We, as a country, did not start deficit spending until 1939, 1940. Why did we start deficit spending? Because we had a huge change of heart because Republicans suddenly thought, oh, it's okay, we were wrong? Why, Fernando, why did we start spending money in 1939, 1940, this country, 1941? What happened?
World
We
War.
had to spend money in the world. Ryan?
World War II.
Yeah. Japan attacked. Hitler was taking over Europe and our allies. And then we started spending huge amounts of money. And that, economists think, is what got us out of the Great Depression. Not any spending, because Republicans were constitutionally, I don't mean by the US Constitution, but they were temperamentally and ideologically opposed. They were opposed again in 2008, and all the way through, it's been Republicans who are worried, who generally support big business, and who say, no, we can't do this. We have to have balanced budgets and the like. And the Democrats who have said back into the 19th century, there should be looser money policies. Now, what's really unique is that there's no opposition at all. And that's largely, I think, because our current president, who's made his fortune besides all the money, millions and millions he was given by his father, to the extent that he's made money since, obviously trading on publicity and his name and stuff, but also borrowed money, right? Because a guy who's gone bankrupt 4 different times. So he completely believes in debt, and he's neutered any Republican opposition to spending. And so now we have the most massive spending package, I think, since World War II anyway, for sure. Now I can't remember what the question was, but okay. Annika says, I've heard about meat packing. Let me read it all. I've heard about meat packing plants that are closing down because of COVID, which is going to decrease supply, right? And therefore I assume increased cost. Will those prices in the meat industry be impacted by government action against price gouging? Or how will economists distinguish that from price gouging? That's a very sophisticated set of questions, Annika. Seriously, I'm not patronizing you. Yes, it is true that there have been lots of COVID in meat packing. You can imagine why. Just at close quarters. And of course, once you get one infection in a place that looked like, you have hot spots in various places because people don't know that somebody's infected, and then everybody's becoming infected because it's so contagious. Yes, of course, if there's a lower supply of meat, that will drive up meat prices, all else equal. Remember, on the other hand, that people won't be buying as much meat because meat's already expensive, and you won't be buying meat with your disposable income. And more it's sunk into people that meat isn't really very good for you. So there are countervailing forces that have been lowering demand for meat. Meat's price has not been skyrocketing in recent years, for sure. And now we have Impossible Burger and, the various forms of mock meat, lab-generated meat. And so we have other ways of getting meat than getting them from meat packers, right? We don't have steaks yet that way. We will. But we certainly have burgers, which is the most popular form in which meat is eaten. So there are these countervailing prices. If prices go up hugely, yeah, there'll probably be, as there has been throughout history, a reaction against people charging too much. What you correctly call price gouging. This is more than you want to know, but there's a famous case in the classics literature, Greek and Roman culture, of an orator, a famous orator, and his oration is against the grain merchants. That's how one way it's translated. It's Greek, and I think that's like the 5th century BC or the 4th century BC. And it's about guys, grain merchants, who during a time of relative famine kept the grain aside so that they would lower the supply and therefore drive up the price, right? And these guys were brought up on charges and they were going to be killed, and this guy was defending them. So this is a story that's as old as shortages in history. Adam Smith actually argued that you shouldn't go too far in persecuting people like that, because they might be the most efficient people at gathering what you need, the meat, the grain, whatever. And so you don't want to go overboard and, punish them so severely that then you don't have anything, right? Something that's called engrossing. And he was writing that you shouldn't be so hard-assed or tough on engrossers. But not grocers, but engrossers, Grosser. But I think it has certainly happened. It's happened in my lifetime when the last time we had a huge shortage of anything that was important in my lifetime. That's before all of you were born. Well, Laren, I'm not so sure, but what year were you born, Laren? What year were you born, Laren? Your mic's off. So
okay, here we go. Yeah, I was born in 1967. All
right, so Laren was a little kid, but in 1973, there was the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, came to an agreement, and suddenly, to retaliate against United States actions in the Middle East with regard to Israel, they suddenly clamped down on the supply of oil. And one day we were driving around here in Boston and oil was 29 cents a gallon. And within weeks it was 73 cents a gallon, and you couldn't get any. There were all these lines at the pump, hours waiting, driving around using oil or gasoline in order to find a gas station that actually had gasoline. There was a guy up in Boston who started charging $1 something or other a gallon, right? And he was arrested for Annika, for just what you're talking about, for price gouging. And I always thought that was crazy that he was being arrested for that. But that is the kind of thing that you could easily imagine. How much extra money is the government planting on printing? How will that affect the economy? Asks Laren right here. Well, the government is, how much of they planning on printing? I have no idea. They're going to, the government spends more than it takes in. That's deficits, right? We'll get rid of the myth part here. That's what a deficit is. The accumulated deficits are the national debt, right? Year after year, borrow more and more, it adds to the debt. Those deficits are covered by borrowing. Government issues IOUs. I don't have a U.S. bond handy here, but the government hands you a bond, an IOU, you hand the government the money, right? And so the deficit is covered by the borrowed money. Where does the government who does the government borrow from? Borrows from anybody who wants to buy government bonds, because they figure now the one person who will pay you back, or the one institution that will pay you back in the world, is the United States. So it's the safest place to park your money. And the Federal Reserve prints dollars. It doesn't print them, it creates them electronically, and uses that money to buy the bonds as well. I don't know what the proportions are. So Landon, it's like, this is what we did after the crash of 2008. There was about, the actual amount of printed money and coins, it doesn't vary that much. It's about a little less than $1 trillion before the crash of 2008, a little more than that now. And now there's even more because people all over the world use the money. So we actually print more, but it's more for that purpose than anything else. The Federal Reserve, meanwhile, has electronically, there was $1 trillion, let's say, in circulation. Most of that was currency. Now it went up to 4 trillion, came back down, with no inflation, by the way, right? Even though everybody worried, the Republicans again and again, oh my God, there's going to be inflation, there's going to be inflation. And it never happened. And now we're going to go, the Fed will probably wind up with another couple of trillion, something like that. We'll be up around 6. It will be the Fed so-called balance sheet. Balance sheet is how much you owe, how much you own. And so the Fed will have created, so there'll be 6 trillion in circulation. But the money isn't being spent. And that's why you don't, that's back to my earlier answer, that's why you don't see inflation. You know, and are companies going to be spending money to invest anytime soon? What can you even before this, what could you really spend money on if you're a company? We don't build auto plants anymore or steel mills. The investment in a company is the people who get paid well in San Jose, California, the kids to come up with new apps that don't cost anything to make, right? I mean, no physical stuff to make. I mean, maybe a computer chip factory somewhere. Tesla, that guy spends money. But I mean, so there's hardly any money being spent. And I think that's why there isn't inflation, by the way, is that the investors don't spend, the businesses don't invest, and consumers continue to spend, have continued to spend, but they're undoubtedly, I mean, we know they're cutting back. I'm cutting back. You guys are, your families, I'm sure, are cutting back. And so the government will create more money, but it will not, it will not do what Lydia was worried about. Right, okay, so Jonah says, why do you believe we still have problems stimulating the economy, even though we've learned from moments like the, well, it's an ideological resistance to, you know, there's this belief that if you spend money, it will be spent profligately, that is unwisely, just squandered, thrown away. You know, there's this whole tremendous suspicion of government, and it's a lot of bureaucratic jobs, and you know, the money will be wasted. That's the argument. When you see what happens when you've pared down government as much as we have, and then some crisis comes along, I think most of us, many of us at any rate, think, gee, we don't mind if there's a few more bureaucrats on whom money is wasted, as long as we still had a pandemic response force, which President Trump ended some time ago. I'd feel a lot more secure if there were people in those positions, even if some of them were deadbeats who were just, you know, getting a paycheck as opposed to working hard to protect me. But that's the traditional resistance, is it's your money, or our money. It's not the government's money. The government wastes it, so we shouldn't have the government spending, right? And it's not that that's completely crazy. It's just, as with everything else, it's just a question of balance. What does it cost you? All economics is about weighing costs against benefits. The benefit is you're spending less and you don't have a bunch of deadbeat bureaucrats giving people a hard time. The cost is you don't have enough people to save you when the unforeseen occurs, as it is now. Ryan, you got a question? Oh, Ryan talked before, but he moved in my screen. He used to be in the upper right. He's now in the bottom middle. Other questions? Yeah, Ryan.
Oh no, sorry, yeah. I had to step away for a second.
I see. That's why you lost your place. Okay. So ask me a question.
Well, I guess What's really interesting is that since we are going into college and planning our majors, what we're going to major in, what we're going into, I guess there's some anxiety too about what our job outlooks are going to look like coming out of this.
I can
Do you
certainly
think
understand
there's going to be demand in new markets maybe after this, even like video conferencing and stuff like this?
Yes, this is a very astute and distressing concern or point that you're making. There is plenty of evidence that people who are graduating, of course, you're graduating high school, right? You're not, you guys are in high school.
Yes.
So you're not going to be graduating college and going into the job market for 4 years, or if you take a gap year 5, or if you take a really long time, maybe 6, or go to graduate school. A lot of people after 2000, coming out of school in 2000, coming out of college in 2008, 2009, went to graduate school just to stay out of the job market. Depending on, so I've got a maybe a bump and then, the bathtub here. And I don't know when that starts to pick up again, whether that's when you're getting out of college or not. If you were getting out of college right now, I would think it was a more distressed, you should be more concerned and would be more distressed, because you would be going into a job market that is shrunk substantially and shrinking as we speak. And it's a real problem if you don't get a job right away because you're further back in line. There's good data on this. Last studies I've seen anyway are that if you get out, you go into the job market at a time when the job market is not tight, meaning it's easy to find a job, but very loose, meaning hard to find a job, then you are penalized for that, and penalized in terms of income for the rest of your working life, because you don't start out at a salary. You're lower. You start lower. Takes you longer, and so you're behind people even coming after you.
Oh, okay.
So that's a real concern for people who are going to be graduating college right now. It's not that nobody's hiring around here. I just saw an article in the Boston Globe today, the Boston Daily paper, that a third of CEOs, high-tech CEOs, said they were hiring now. And when you look at what the successful companies are at the moment, Zoom, Netflix, right? Nintendo, those companies, they damn well better be hiring at Netflix. We can't get onto our Netflix, my wife and I, at 9 o'clock at night. That may be because of Verizon, actually, because of our, I don't know if it's because of Netflix or it's probably because of our internet connection now, I'm thinking. So it's Verizon, that is our cable company, and Verizon doesn't have enough people, or it should be adding bandwidth or new cables or doing something, because we're frozen out. We can't watch our shows. So anyway, there are jobs, and as you say, Ryan, I mean, there are the way to be thinking about it is, okay, what are people going to need? There'll be lots of jobs driving groceries to people's houses for a long time to come. I don't guess that that's exactly what you want to do with your life, but maybe there, I don't know. But to think outside the box, I know it's such a cliche, but it certainly makes more sense than ever when you're thinking about what your future might be now. Right.
Because especially, I guess, when you think about future expectations, where they're talking about a second coming of this virus maybe next year.
Yeah, that's my...
Do you think there's going to be like new markets created that we really didn't even have anymore before?
Well, you would certainly think so. I mean, virtual reality. I would be figuring out how to get into the virtual reality industry if I were your age. Seriously, I mean, I could be completely wrong about this. Please do not invite me back to a class years from now, or a reunion of your high school class, and say, well, you said virtual reality was all bullshit. So it's possible. but if I'm a betting man, um, I have an Oculus Quest downstairs. Everybody know what Oculus Quest is?
Yeah.
Nod if you do. Anybody not know what Oculus Quest is? No, nobody doesn't know. And I think business meetings in the future will be virtual reality. Um, I think all kinds of things will be virtual reality, and that means people who are improving the technology, understand how it works, getting cameras, 360 cameras that are cheaper, figuring out how to light when there's and that's just one thing that I'm picking up on. A world of jobs there that don't exist at the moment, and I'm sure that's true in the medical field and biotechnology, and who doesn't want to live longer than they live now? I mean, healthy live longer. So sure, there's going to be lots of jobs for which you're going to need a lot of education, and therefore, let's see. So Laren, you have an Oculus Rift in the makerspace. Oh, that's an Oculus Rift in the makerspace in our library at the Magnet. Well, there you go. So you all have access to it. I would highly recommend Beat Saber. And I would also highly recommend Richie's Plank Experience, which is where you go up into a building and can try to deal with a phobia, if you have one, as I do, for heights, by literally walking out. Literally, I mean virtually walking out onto a plank 60 stories up and then jumping off. Quite an experience. Anyway, there'll be lots of things like that. So yes, there'll be lots of different jobs, but that's why I would be thinking much more broadly if I were a young person today. When I got out of school, you didn't have to worry about a thing. The economy was growing. You could get a job. Really, nobody I knew, and they had student loans. Even in those days, I've learned recently from a Zoom conference with my best friends from college. I had no idea. Nobody talked about it because nobody worried about it. Because the economy was booming and there was less inequality, not more. So I graduated college in 1966, and you just didn't worry about the economy or what your place in it at all. It's different now. It's been different for years. Let's see, Jonah, would the federal government consider something like the legalization of marijuana to help pay off or reduce the deficit? It's done a very good job for Colorado, right? Their taxes have been huge because of that. Would taxes on that even help, or would other policies be preferable? How does the government raise money? Well, you could tax rich people. You could tax estates, right? Talk about ideological opposition to what used to be called the estate tax, and which Republicans then called the death tax, renamed the death tax. I had a young person I knew who said, and I'll leave you with this, but he said, if you can't tax dead rich people, who can you tax? So that would be one answer to your question there, Jonah. But we've gone over an hour now. I don't know how long people want to go. Dinner isn't ready yet, so I'm okay to hang around for a few more minutes. But am I wearing out my welcome, Michael?
No, you're good. You can whenever you're good if you want to keep going.
Well, I guess the thing is, what else does anybody have to do at this point?
Yeah, right.
Particularly if you can't get your Netflix, which we're pushing closer to it. So anyway, any other questions?
You know what? I would like to.
Nadja's on. Nadja, you're here. I can finally see you. Can you ask me a question? Is your mic is? Let me. Oh, your mic still doesn't work? No. So write a question. Write it down, or put it in the chat. I mean, put it in the chat. My mic wasn't working, so now just chat a question. Everybody, that's lots of people have been doing that now. Anyway, somebody else ask a question while Nadja's. Joshua, give me another question.
You know what? I got a question maybe do you think do you have maybe a list of books that these guys might be interested in reading, or some novels or something that just aspiring economists or these guys kind of have a good idea of what's going on, that they might be interested in, like your deficit myth? That seemed like an interesting book that they'd get into. But anything else that they can, with all this free time, I mean, they just read.
Yeah, no, well, my go-to books tend to be more, I don't know, philosophical rather than, practical. So I don't read a lot of, I'm looking at my bookshelves now to see if I have a sudden inspiration. I read a lot of history and economic history. A book these are, I'm reluctant to name my favorite books because they take us in a more philosophical direction. But let me think about it for a minute, because Nadia has a question. I asked some of my friends to contribute for me, like Tim asked the question I was curious to contribute for me, like Tim asked the question I was curious about. So Nadia had asked other people to. So books. What would be a good book on what's going on now? Well, a book that'll take you forever to read, but that is a really good book on what happened in 2008 is this book here. This is called Crashed. It's by this guy, Adam Tooze, who's a professor at Columbia University and who does a lot of writing for journals and has been writing a lot about the current crisis. And that gives you a really good view of what happened in 2008 and how we got out of it. The kind of efforts that the Federal Reserve made and that the government made as well. The government meaning the Treasury Department and the Congress. And so I think that book will last you quite a long time. It's not a fun read, and it's very serious. But other books, I'm trying to think of people. I don't have a good handle on what good books for high school seniors, economic students are. Is it smart to move economically to put the blame on China for this outbreak? Jonah asks. Smart move economically. Well, of course, the reason that the blame is being put on China is all political. It has nothing to do with economics. It's to to shunt the blame away from yourself. I mean, and not to say that China behaved responsibly or that their numbers are accurate, but compared to the United States, China was taken completely by surprise, right? China had no idea this was coming. Bang, it started happening there. They didn't know what the hell it was. We had months and months of notice, kind of advance notice. And we have a death rate per person, per population, that's somewhere between, if you believe China's numbers, it's 40 times China's. If you don't believe China's numbers, it's less than that. But even if China is lying by a factor of 10, it's still 4 times as bad as China's performance. So I don't know how anybody could say that the United States had done a good job relative to China. And China clearly didn't try to get this going. There are people in China now who blame the United States, actually, for the same reasons, purely political, having nothing to do with economics. I don't think most people believe that, or many people believe it. But as a smart move economically, no. I mean, and it's not. And geopolitically, you want to have a Cold War with China? I mean, seriously, they've got somewhere between 4 and probably closer to 5 times as many people. That means 5 times as many. This doesn't exactly map, but it's 5 times as many Yao Mings, if you remember him, the 7'6" Chinese NBA player. I mean, 5 times as many tall people. Probably not that because of nutrition and stuff, but way more geniuses, way more tall people, way more everything than we do. They were the richest country in the world up until about the year 1500 or something like that. Then fell behind for a variety of reasons. The West developed technology and China, for a variety of reasons, didn't. We're in abeyance. Now they're finally coming back as they look at it. It's their rightful place in the world. Who's to argue with them? And so you want to take them on? You want to make China the villain? I don't have an argument with saying that, that you want to make sure that as best you can, you want to put pressure on them to not use unfair trade practices and things like that. Although as a much poorer country, you can understand what they've done. But to make them into an antagonist would strike me as economically, politically, morally, and every other which way, not a very smart thing to do now. I see Jonah agrees with me, which is, I guess, why with that question. Yeah. Luisa.
I know a lot of, I guess, kids our age that are incoming college freshmen are concerned that, I guess, if this virus continues up until the fall, is it worth paying like $60,000 for tuition if you're going to be staying at home? And I've read a couple of articles saying how right now is the easiest time to get into competitive colleges just because some universities are concerned about the instability. So how do you think this crisis is going to affect college tuition?
This gets back to the argument I was starting to have with Michael way back. That's, I think, another argument. That's another factor in favor of the argument that prices will go down and that there will be fewer jobs, because I think a lot of people. Well, you're telling me that a lot of people. You're the high school senior after all. Yes. Why wouldn't you think that you don't want to spend $60,000 a year to do an online course? Leave aside the fact that somebody like me might come along and do it for nothing. But even if you subscribe or go to Coursera or something like that, it's some tiny fraction of what you would have to pay to be on campus, tuition, not to mention room and board. And of course, lots more young people have been moving back home anyway, and certainly now, even more so. Okay, bye, Annika. I think that's a real issue for colleges, which is why they're going to be admitting more people, and I think that's one of the major changes we could see as a result of this. Not just businessmen not going to conferences, or academics. A friend of mine who teaches at New York University said, I'm never going to another academic conference again. He's not the most sociable guy. He said he's uncomfortable when he goes to these conferences anyway. He said, somebody wants me to do a seminar, I'll do it online now. Well, that has exactly the implications you're talking about. So I certainly can see how that would affect colleges going forward. And, when you think about, when you go to a large university, when you take an economics course, the equivalent of Michael's course here, you're in a room with 300 or 400 people. Leave aside the fact that you're not going to want to be in a room with that many people for quite some time because of COVID or its mutations. But beyond that, how much do you get out of that compared to being able to do it online in a setting like this? I mean, you can't, it's going to be very hard to do this. You're not going to have a professor who sits here and answers everybody's question, because you'll have, if you have 300 people, how many people can get in a question? But you can, but this is actually, I hadn't thought of it until this second, but this is a perfect example of what could happen. That there would be people like me, we would be paid presumably, not just doing it because we get a kick out of it and want to be helpful. But there'd be people like me who could do this, and it would be just as effective or more effective than a lecture where I'm, somebody's just reading their notes, right? Year after year, nobody can get in a question. Why wouldn't, and look how much cheaper it would be for everybody, right? And I could do this and not have, 15 people or whatever it was, 20 in the beginning here or something. I could have 2,000. And I'd have questions coming on the right here, and I'd pick and choose questions. I've done that when I've moderated, before thousands of people. And the questions come up to the podium, on little cards. And it would depend, the most effective people would be the ones who would be doing this, and other people would fall by the wayside, right? Other professors who weren't very effective. Because by definition, half of all the people giving economics lectures in this country or anywhere in the world at any given time are below average, right? 50%, they're the bottom 50%. So why wouldn't you have a further, winner take all kind of economy that would be, and that's a good book, a book called The Winner Take All Economy, Winner Take All Society. That's a book by Bob Frank. Well, The Winner Take All Society by Bob Frank and Philip Cook. It's almost 20 years old, but it is, I think, a very good description of what has been happening. In fact, in general, I would highly recommend books by Robert Frank, F-R-A-N-K, professor at Cornell. He has a new book out called what is that called? Under the Influence. And that's a new one about how we can, well, I won't go into any detail, but books by Robert Frank. And in fact, my favorite of them all is one called, take it easy, is called Passions Within Reason. And that's 30 years old. That's one of the philosophical ones I was holding back from recommending, but that was his first great book called Passions Within Reason. Anyway, Robert Frank is the name. Anybody else? Carla has just come in. Or Carla, your mic doesn't work or something like that? The first time I've seen your photo, I think. Anyway.
Well, just with respect to your time and everything, if anybody's got one last question or something they want to throw out, and we just Josh.
Okay, Josh does.
Okay, this doesn't have anything to do with Corona or anything. I just didn't understand how you heard about stagflation in the 70s and how the new Federal Reserve chairman, I think it was, fixed it by increasing the inflation rate. I just didn't really get how that worked.
Say it again. Stagflation of the 70s, and what's the question?
So stagflation was a problem, and in order to fix it, people were lowering the interest rate. But eventually this one guy who was in charge of the reserve increased the interest rate to fix it. I didn't get that. That didn't make sense. How does that work?
Okay. Well, stagflation was a term invented in the 70s because it had always been assumed that there was a trade-off between recession, stagnation of the economy. So stagnation would be no growth, right? Recession, negative growth, the economy shrinks. Depression, economy super shrinks, right? But stagnation, no growth. And inflation. They shouldn't happen at the same time. You shouldn't have, let's not call it stagnation, let's call it recession. You shouldn't have an economy that's going down, getting smaller at the same time that you have prices going up. Why? Because if prices are going up, that's because people are getting paid more and spending more. So how could it be that you would have inflation and the economy would be going down? And the best answer, I think, to the question is that prices from elsewhere, I mentioned the oil crisis of the 1970s, and that's the beginning of stagflation, happened then. Prices from something we absolutely needed. We don't anymore, we now export about as much oil as we import. But in those days, 40%, I think, or more of our oil was imported. So suddenly, if you goose the price on that, then all prices are going up. Then, once prices start going up, people start demanding higher salaries, even in a stagnant economy. And then corporations have to pay more, and then they have to charge more, and then people ask for higher wages, and then inflation happens anyway, okay? And so that was the inflation part of stagflation. And that was happening, and then we were, and there were other things going on. I don't want to go into tremendous detail about it. And so a guy who was the head of the Fed, a guy named Paul Volcker, 6'8", so one of the biggest guy, smoking a cigar all the time. He smoked a cigar. Great sense of humor and a tough guy. And Paul Volcker said, well, the one way to get inflation under control, stagnation of the economy had it had stopped stagnating by the late 1970s. And so now inflation was really going out of control. He thought going out of control. Is I'm going to slow the economy down. I'm going to stop the economy in its tracks, and that will stop people asking for higher wages, and that will stop companies from raising their prices, and it'll stop the wage price spiral, as it was called. And so he raised interest rates, and when he raised interest rates, everything becomes more expensive. And technically, the way it works, the way the Federal Reserve works, and I'm not going to go into the mechanics of it, but basically what it does is it removes money from the economy as opposed to creating money, which is what we were talking about earlier. And so, and that had the desired effect. The economy went into a recession, a pretty deep recession. And interest rates, he got interest rates to come down. That slowed the economy, which meant people didn't want to borrow from other people and therefore weren't bidding up the price of money. So it had a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop. And inflation went away and has never come back. Now, is that the only reason? Did Paul Volcker get lucky? Globalization was happening at that point. That's right after China entered the world economy. Maybe it was just Chinese prices being so low that they caused inflation, or globalization was causing inflation to go down. Maybe it was the computer was really coming online at that point. Personal computer starts right at that same time, right around 1980, early 1980s. The Macintosh is 1984. So maybe that's really what did it so much more than Paul Volcker. Or maybe that's what kept inflation down after Paul Volcker had gotten it down. But that's, I think, the textbook answer to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, guys, if anybody else has a last question or anything, or if you guys think of something else, we can talk about it in class. But, we want to make sure Paul gets off to dinner.
Yeah, I'm tuckered out at this point.
So we appreciate it. Really, thank you for spending this a little over an hour with us. Answering questions, and these guys are interested in everything that you had to say. So thank you so much.
Oh, please. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.
We didn't embarrass you, Mr. Jigger?
Hell yeah, you embarrassed me, man. You're supposed to know those answers, man.
I said World War II.
Huh?
I said, oh, Roosevelt. I should have just said Roosevelt.
I know, yeah. That one was kind of weird. Like, I couldn't really tell what that guy was. And like, he was like, yeah, look at this statue. Well, who's this statue? I'm like,
And then Fernando told me he was watching anime instead of listening.
what an
And
idiot.
that's why he was like, what?
What an idiot. Oh, well. Well, I hope you guys like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, huh? I mean, he's pretty bright guy, man. Pretty sharp guy. So he was able to answer a lot, or kind of give us a lot of different insight on things that are going on. So
How'd you even get a hold of him?
what's that?
How'd you like get a hold of him?
On Twitter. Yeah, Carla. I'll send you the recording for sure. Carla is actually, she's a professor at EPCC. She teaches, I think she teaches macro and micro. So you guys have already taken micro, and then you're taking macro right now. But she teaches those classes too. So, but at EPCC, she's, I mean, just as sharp, super awesome person. So, but well, her mic's not working. So, well, whatever. But thanks, Carla. Thanks for showing up. And I'll send you the recording. All right. Oh, how did I get a hold of him? Let me stop the recording.